She was just a silent girl in a town that had forgotten how to listen. He was a wounded stray who had no bark, no home, and no reason to trust anyone. But when fate pushed them together, what followed was not just survival, it was transformation. This is the story of Ellie, a deaf child hidden behind fear, and Dusty, a dog who refused to leave. Together, they uncovered the power of love that asks for nothing but presence. If you've ever needed a reason to believe in quiet miracles, this story is yours. Stay with us. Cedar Hollow was a small town tucked behind evergreen ridges where snow came early and never fully left. The kind of place where the sun barely stretched across the sky in winter, and where the wind always smelled faintly of pine and forgotten wood smoke. People here lived quietly, not because they didn't care about each other, but because they all carried something they didn't speak of. Everyone knew everyone's name, but not their pain. They called Ellie the quiet one, the girl who never spoke, though it wasn't by choice. Ellie was 10 years old, with shoulder-length black hair, amber eyes that seemed too large for her face, and a silence that followed her like a shadow. She hadn't heard a single sound since she was 3, after a fever robbed her of her hearing. Her parents had vanished in a house fire a year later. No one ever confirmed what was left behind. She'd been shuffled through care homes until Roger Klein took her in. A former soldier with a weathered face and a limp in his right leg, Roger had lived alone since his wife's passing. He was not unkind, not on paper. But there was something cold in that house, like the air had settled into its own kind of stillness, a silence that didn't end with words. Ellie's room was in the attic, with a slanted ceiling and a window that looked out over the woods. She didn't complain. She didn't speak. She drew. Her notebooks were filled with sketches of things she could never hear. Wind in the trees, birds in the morning, glass shattering on kitchen tiles after Roger lost his temper and threw another bottle at the wall. She imagined the sounds and gave them form in pencil and ink, turning silence into something living. One autumn afternoon, when the sky was low and gray, Ellie chose to walk home through the woods rather than take the school bus. She liked the forest path, blanketed in crisp yellow leaves. Each step had a rhythm she could feel in her bones, like footsteps in her chest. As she turned around a bend near the old lumber yard, she stopped. Something moved. Not a noise, but a flicker at the corner of her vision. Nestled near a pile of fallen branches was a figure. A dog. Large. Mottled gray and brown with fur matted and a limp in one hind leg. It didn't bark or growl. It didn't even flinch. It just stared at her with golden eyes, calm and unblinking. Ellie crouched slowly, her heart pounding as if it wanted to fill the silence between them. From her backpack, she pulled out half a sandwich and placed it a few feet from the dog. Then she stepped back. The dog didn't rush or snatch. It looked at her, then at the food, then back again. Finally, it ate, slowly, methodically. Ellie didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed. She didn't try to touch it. She just sat nearby and watched. From that day on, she returned. Every afternoon after school, she visited the same spot, bringing scraps of food and clean water in an old thermos. She called the dog Dusty, not because it was dirty, but because it reminded her of something soft and distant, like the color of forgotten corners. She drew pictures for him. Stories. Feelings. She showed him things she never showed anyone else. Dusty never barked, never made a sound, but his eyes listened. She hid him in the old storage shed near the edge of the woods, abandoned and half-rotted. It became their place, a quiet world where no one shouted, and nothing broke. Dusty watched over her, especially on the days Roger came home angrier than usual. But peace is a fragile thing. One morning, Roger found paw prints in the snow outside the porch. He stared at them for a long time before calling Ellie to the front door. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough. He flicked his cigarette into the snow and muttered something she couldn't hear, but she saw the shape of his mouth. "If I see that thing again, it's dead." Ellie nodded, her throat tight. That night she couldn't sleep. She pressed her hand against the window pane, the glass fogging under her breath. In the woods beyond, somewhere in the dark, Dusty was out there, waiting, watching. But she knew. If Roger ever found him, waiting wouldn't be enough. The snow came earlier than expected that year. By the time November had barely unfolded its arms, Cedar Hollow was already buried in white silence. Ellie woke each morning to windows etched with frost like spiderwebs made of glass. Her fingers ached as she pulled on wool mittens too large for her hands and stepped into the day. She didn't complain. She never did. The world didn't listen anyway. But something inside her had begun to shift since she found Dusty. She had a secret now. Something warm and alive. Something no one could take away. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. Each afternoon, she followed the same routine. She slipped a slice of bread or a few pieces of leftover chicken into her coat pocket. Sometimes, if she was lucky, she found a boiled egg or a granola bar at the back of the pantry. Roger never noticed. Or if he did, he never mentioned it. He had started drinking earlier each day since the frost arrived, and the quiet hum of the television became the only voice in the house. Ellie would leave her backpack by the door, press her notebook flat beneath her arm, and head into the woods. The path to the shed was more difficult now. Snow came up to her ankles, and in some places the ground had iced over, slick and treacherous. But she moved carefully, her boots remembering each stone, each hidden root. When she arrived, Dusty would already be there, curled in a pile of torn blankets she had scavenged from the attic. His injured leg was healing, though the limp remained. He would perk up when he saw her, those golden eyes lighting like lanterns. She would sit beside him and draw. Sometimes pictures of the forest, sometimes of herself riding a dog with wings. Other times she simply sketched his face, over and over like a prayer in pencil. Dusty would watch her work, head tilted slightly, one ear flopped forward. It was their time. But one afternoon as she returned home, her heart froze before her fingers did. Roger was standing in the snow, cigarette clamped between his lips, staring at the steps. The tracks. Ellie followed his gaze. Pause. 4 of them. Deep. Leading right up to the porch. She hadn't wiped them away. She had been too tired. Too eager to sneak Dusty some leftover sausage before bed. She knew the snow would fall again by morning and cover everything. But it hadn't. Not yet. Roger turned. His face wasn't angry. Not in the way she was used to. It was still. Cold. He bent down, touched the edge of the nearest paw print, and then looked at her. "Where is it?" he said. She shook her head slowly. He stepped toward her. "Don't play dumb with me. You've been feeding it. I can tell. I can smell it on your coat. You think I'm stupid?" She shook her head again, more urgently. Her hands trembled. He didn't hit her. He didn't need to. His voice alone was enough to make her bones tighten. "If I see it near here again, it won't walk away." That night, Ellie didn't eat. She sat on her bed, staring out the window, watching snow fall like feathers into the dark. Dusty hadn't followed her home that afternoon. She had told him to stay behind. She had pointed to the shed and pressed her hand to her heart, hoping he would understand. She didn't know if he had. But she hoped. She couldn't draw. Her hands were stiff and weak, her chest hollow. She took her notebook, the one she never showed anyone, and tore out a page. With hard strokes, she drew Roger's face, twisted and looming, and Dusty in front of her like a shield. Blood on the snow. The kind of picture she never let herself make. When it was done, she folded it tightly and hid it beneath the loose floorboard in the shed, beneath Dusty's blanket, in case. Days passed. She returned to the shed. Dusty greeted her, still limping, still silent. But his eyes had changed. He was wary now. Always listening. Always alert. Then came the day she found the trap. It was hidden near the trail, buried just beneath the surface of the snow. A metal jaw, rusted at the hinge. Roger had left it there, waiting. Ellie stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. She wanted to scream, but she didn't know how. She picked up a rock and smashed the trap until it bent, until it was no longer a threat. Then she buried it deeper. That night, she cried for the first time in months. Not because of what had happened, but because of what almost had. She knew now. Roger wasn't just angry. He was hunting. And Dusty, her silent guardian, was in more danger than ever before. The sky turned a bruised shade of gray that afternoon, the kind that warned of more than just snow. Ellie felt it in her fingertips before she saw it in the clouds. The trees had gone still. The wind had stopped whispering. Even the birds, those she only saw but never heard, had vanished into the canopy. Something had shifted. She didn't go to the shed that day. Roger had been drinking since morning. The bottles clinked louder than footsteps, and his voice carried through the walls in broken rhythms, harsh and slurred. Ellie stayed in her room, sketching lines that made no sense, lines that crossed and cracked like shattered glass. She tried to draw Dusty, but her hands wouldn't obey. She kept seeing the trap, the rusted teeth, the blood she hadn't yet seen but somehow already feared. The snow began again before dusk, soft at first, then thicker. By nightfall, the entire world outside was white and blinding. Roger's yelling had stopped. The television was silent. Ellie thought maybe he had passed out. She thought she could breathe again. She was wrong. The door to her room opened with a creak she could not hear, but she felt the air change. Roger stood there, silhouetted against the yellow glow of the hallway. His coat was on. His boots. He swayed slightly. In one hand was a flashlight. The other gripped something metal. "Get your coat," he said. She didn't move. "I said get your coat." He stepped forward, grabbed her arm not hard, but firm, and pulled her from the bed. She stumbled, hands shaking as she reached for the red jacket that still hung on the peg by the door. Her fingers fumbled with the zipper, but Roger didn't wait. He pushed open the back door, and the cold slammed into them like a wall. Snow rose to her calves. The wind had found its voice again, sharp and bitter. Roger marched forward without looking back. Ellie struggled to keep up, her boots sinking, her breath turning to mist. She didn't understand where they were going, not until they reached the edge of the trees. He stopped, turned, and pointed. "That dog's out there, isn't it?" Ellie blinked at him, confused. She looked toward the shed, hidden behind the cluster of birch trees, invisible now beneath layers of snow. "I saw the prints again. Today. This morning." He leaned down, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think I don't know what you've been doing? You think I'm blind? You're not smart, girl. You're not special." He stood upright again. His shoulders swayed, but his grip on the flashlight tightened. "You want to see it again? Fine, call it." She shook her head violently. Her lips moved, but no sound came. "Call it," he snapped. She raised her hands, fingers trembling, unsure what to sign, unsure if he even understood her. The snow spun around them in frantic spirals. Roger turned toward the trees. "It's not going to come, you know. You think it loves you? It's just a dog. It'll leave like everything else." Then he raised the flashlight and hurled it into the darkness. It hit something, hard. A sharp movement in the shadows. A blur of gray and gold. Dusty. He had been watching, waiting. And now he was running toward them. Roger moved too fast. He reached behind his coat and pulled out something Ellie had never seen before. A rod. A pole. No, a pipe. Metal. He swung it. Dusty skidded to a stop, barking. No sound reached Ellie, but she saw the snow spray beneath his paws. She screamed, but no one heard. Roger raised the pipe again. Dusty didn't move back. He didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He simply stood between Ellie and Roger, shoulders tense, eyes burning. The pipe came down. Dusty dodged. Just barely. It clipped his side. He yelped, and this time, Ellie felt the sound like a lightning bolt in her chest. She ran forward, arms outstretched, not knowing what to do, just needing to be there. Roger stumbled, caught in the deep snow, and fell to one knee. Ellie reached Dusty, threw herself around his neck. He was panting, warm, real, and still standing. Roger rose again, breath ragged, pipe still in hand. "I should have left you where I found you," he snarled. Then Dusty growled. A deep, rumbling sound Ellie had never heard but could feel through her ribs, through her heart, through the ground itself. The dog stepped forward, placing himself between Ellie and Roger again, this time with teeth bared. Roger hesitated. Something passed through his eyes. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. As if he finally understood this dog was not just some stray. Dusty didn't lunge. He didn't need to. He just stared. unmoving. Roger lowered the pipe, dropped it. He turned, walked back toward the house, left them there, in the snow, in the dark. Dusty pressed his head against Ellie's chest, and she held him, eyes wide with tears that froze as they fell. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but tonight she was not alone. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of the silence. The snow didn't stop that night. It fell thick and heavy, blanketing everything in a hush that swallowed even memory. Ellie sat curled beside Dusty inside the shed, her red jacket soaked, her gloves stiff with ice. She didn't go back to the house. She couldn't. Roger had left the pipe where it fell. He hadn't said another word. He had simply disappeared into the dark, into the house, into whatever storm was twisting behind his eyes. Dusty didn't sleep. He kept his body pressed against hers, one ear flicking at every sound. His ribs rose and fell in a slow rhythm that kept her from shaking. She didn't cry. She just drew circles in the frost with her finger until morning came, gray and unforgiving. At dawn, she crept back toward the house. Roger was passed out in his armchair, mouth open, bottle still in his hand. The TV was on but static, flickering like a storm in a box. Ellie moved quietly, grabbed a pack of crackers, a can of tuna, and a flashlight. She wrapped it all in a scarf and hid them under her coat. Then she returned to the shed, where Dusty was waiting, still limping, still watching. She knew she had to do more than just hide him. She had to protect him. At school, Ellie said nothing, as always. She didn't need to. Her drawings had begun to change. They no longer showed forests and skies. They showed rooms filled with broken bottles, a girl with no mouth, a dog with a bleeding paw, a tall man with no eyes, just shadow. Lauren Becker, the new art teacher, noticed. She was young, barely 30, with hair the color of rust and eyes that flickered when she spoke. She had only been in Cedar Hollow for 3 months, and already the other teachers thought she was too curious, too soft, too invested. But Lauren had a gift. She saw things that others overlooked. And when she looked at Ellie's sketchbook, she didn't just see drawings. She saw confessions. She knelt beside Ellie's desk one afternoon while the other children painted snowflakes. Ellie had drawn a wolf, not a scary one, a beautiful one, standing in front of a small girl with her hands over her ears. "This is Dusty, isn't it?" Lauren asked gently. Ellie looked up, surprised. No one had ever said his name, not out loud, not like that. Ellie hesitated, then nodded. "Is he yours?" Ellie didn't answer. She just flipped to the next page. A picture of the shed, the trap, the metal teeth. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Later that evening, after the children had left, Lauren stayed behind. She photocopied 3 pages from Ellie's sketchbook and folded them into her coat pocket. Then she walked out into the snow, past the empty schoolyard, and headed toward the woods. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Only that something was wrong. And sometimes a child's silence said more than a dozen cries. The trees were thick, branches heavy with snow, but the path was visible. Lauren followed the footprints, small and deep, weaving through the brush. She came upon the shed just before sunset. It looked abandoned, forgotten. But when she pushed open the door, the smell of wet dog and wood smoke struck her instantly. Dusty growled low from the corner. Lauren froze. Then Ellie stepped forward, out of the shadows, her face pale but calm. She didn't speak. She just held out her hand and pointed to the floor. Lauren stepped inside, heart thudding. Ellie knelt, pulled back a loose plank, and retrieved something wrapped in cloth. Inside was a picture. Crude, frantic lines. A man swinging a pipe. A dog crouched in defense. A girl on her knees. Blood in the snow. Lauren's throat tightened. She reached for Ellie's hand. "You're safe with me," she whispered, even though Ellie could not hear. She stayed with them until the stars rose. Then she walked Ellie back to the house. Roger was not there. The living room was dark. The truck was gone. The door was unlocked. Inside, the couch was overturned. The TV shattered. A cabinet door hung off one hinge. Lauren didn't wait. She called the sheriff from her phone, her fingers cold and stiff. Back at the shed, Dusty remained alone, watching the woods, waiting. He didn't bark. He didn't chase. He just waited. And when the moon rose, he walked back to the trailhead and sat, watching. As if he already knew someone would need him soon. The power went out sometime after midnight. The wind had been pushing against the windows all evening, howling through the trees like something alive, something searching. In the small cabin tucked at the edge of Cedar Hollow's woods, the only light left was the faint orange flicker from the dying embers in the fireplace. Lauren stood in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. But the signal had vanished with the storm. She tried 3 more times, holding her breath each time, before slipping the phone into her coat pocket and walking back into the living room where Ellie sat curled beneath a blanket, eyes wide and unblinking. She had not spoken, not since the sheriff's visit. She had not drawn. Dusty was not with them. Lauren had insisted he stay in the shed until she could get clearance from Animal Services. But now, every minute that passed without him felt like something missing from the room itself, as if silence had become too quiet. Lauren leaned down beside Ellie, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "He'll be okay," she whispered, not knowing if the words meant anything. But Ellie didn't nod. She just stared at the wall, not seeing it. Somewhere far in the dark, something cracked. A tree limb. A shutter. Or maybe footsteps. Lauren stood up, uneasy. The flashlight she'd placed on the mantel was gone. She looked around, frowning. Had she moved it? And then came the knock. Not loud, not frantic, just one, then another. Lauren's chest tightened. She stepped cautiously to the front door. There was no porch light. No sound from the other side. She hesitated. The third knock was louder, closer. Ellie stood up suddenly, moving to the window, peering out through the frosted glass. Her body went rigid. Lauren crossed to her, gently pulled her back. Then she looked. A shadow stood at the tree line. Tall. Broad. The kind of shape that didn't belong to wind or animals or fear. Roger. Lauren's breath hitched. She turned to Ellie. "Stay here," she mouthed. She grabbed a fire poker from beside the hearth and stepped toward the door. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out every other thought. The door creaked open just enough for her to see him. Roger stood under the porch, soaked, his eyes bloodshot, one hand in his coat pocket. "Where's the girl?" he said. "You need to leave," Lauren replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's my child," he said flatly. "She's not yours anymore." He stepped forward. Lauren raised the poker. "I said leave." Roger smiled. Not the kind that carried joy, the kind that curved with madness. "You think a dog's gonna save her?" Then came the growl. Low, deep. From the woods behind the cabin. Dusty. He came like smoke through trees, silent and steady. His coat was dark with wet snow, his breath visible in the frozen air. He stepped between Roger and the cabin without sound, his teeth bared but not snarling, his body still but alive with warning. Roger froze. The two locked eyes. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in Roger, in the air, in the world itself. Because Ellie was no longer inside. She had opened the back door, crept out through the snow, and now stood behind Dusty, one hand clutching his fur. Roger saw her. He stepped forward. Dusty moved first. It wasn't a lunge. It wasn't a bite. It was a barrier. He blocked the man with the weight of his body, pushing Ellie backward, shielding her. Roger raised his arm, hand tightening around something metal. A flash of silver, a glint. Lauren shouted. Ellie reached for Dusty. The wind howled, and Dusty leapt. Not to attack, to intercept. The object in Roger's hand, some kind of tool. Maybe a wrench clattered against the side of the porch as Dusty's weight knocked it free. Roger stumbled, fell backward into the snow. Dusty stood over him, teeth inches from his throat. He didn't bite. He didn't have to. Roger lay still. Lauren ran out, pulling Ellie into her arms. The girl clung to her tightly, her small body shaking. Dusty turned, walked slowly to them, his head low, tail still, and sat. The sheriff came half an hour later, headlights cutting through snow like distant hope. Roger didn't resist. When they pulled him to his feet, he muttered something Lauren couldn't hear, something broken. But Ellie didn't look at him. She looked at Dusty. She reached out and placed her hand on his head. The world had nearly gone dark, but he had seen her. He had come. And that made all the difference. Morning came slow and reluctant, dragging its light through the snow-covered trees like a weary sigh. Inside the sheriff's vehicle, Ellie sat in silence, bundled in a borrowed blanket, her cheeks still stained with the ghost of last night's cold. Dusty was curled beside her on the back seat, his head resting against her leg, his breath slow and even. Sheriff Daniels, a man in his 60s with a thick mustache and kind eyes, watched them both through the rearview mirror. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Some things spoke louder than words, and the way Ellie held Dusty's fur like a lifeline said more than any statement ever could. They arrived at the county health office just after sunrise. Lauren was waiting on the front steps, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. She'd been up all night filing reports, calling social services, doing everything she could to make sure Ellie wouldn't be returned to the house that had never been a home. The building smelled of coffee and old paper. Inside, a woman in a blue cardigan named Marlene took Ellie's information, asked quiet questions through hand signals and a clipboard. Ellie answered in drawings. A house with no windows, a bed with no blanket, a dog with wings. The drawings were handed to a supervisor, who read them like evidence. Dusty was not allowed inside, but he waited at the front door, pressed against the glass. When Ellie disappeared down the hallway, he let out a low whimper and curled up on the mat, refusing to move. Lauren came out 20 minutes later and sat beside him. She reached down and scratched the top of his head. "She's okay," she whispered. "They're going to place her somewhere safe." Dusty didn't look at her. He just stared at the hallway. They let her see him one last time before she was taken to the temporary shelter, a small room with a couch and too many chairs. Dusty rushed in as soon as the door opened, nearly knocking over the end table as he bounded toward her. She fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face into his fur. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Long, deep breaths, as if his scent alone could rebuild her lungs. Then she stepped back, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a crumpled drawing. She placed it in Lauren's hand. It was a sketch of Dusty standing between two shadowy figures with a girl holding a broken heart in her chest. But above him, in bold pencil lines, she had drawn a single word. Home. That night, back in Cedar Hollow, snow continued to fall over empty cabins and silent sheds. Dusty sat outside Lauren's house, unwilling to come inside even when called. He lay in the snow as if waiting for something or someone, unwilling to move until she returned. Lauren opened the front door, stepped into the cold, and sat beside him. She didn't tell him to go inside. She just sat, shoulder to fur, heart to heartbeat. The following day, she made her case. She filed paperwork, gave testimony, submitted reports, everything she could to prove that Ellie belonged somewhere she could feel safe again. Not in a new foster house, not in another system, but with her. And with Dusty. She drove across 2 counties to hand-deliver the forms to the judge. She made phone calls until her voice cracked. She argued until her throat ached. Meanwhile, Dusty waited. Every day he would walk to the school and sit beside the gate, watching the children pass. He didn't bark. He didn't chase. He just waited. One afternoon, a car pulled up to the curb. Ellie stepped out. The moment Dusty saw her, he rose. Not with speed, not with surprise, but with certainty. He walked straight to her, and she to him. She knelt in the snow and held him without speaking. Lauren approached slowly. "You're home," she said, more to herself than anyone. And Dusty wagged his tail. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a beginning. From that moment, they were never apart. Dusty slept at the foot of Ellie's bed, waited outside her class, walked beside her down every hallway and trail, and Ellie began to draw again. Not just sadness and storms, but light, laughter, possibility. The rescue had not ended on that porch. It had only just begun. Because sometimes the loudest rescue is the one that speaks no words at all. And the deepest healing begins in silence, when one soul simply chooses to stay. Spring didn't arrive all at once in Cedar Hollow. It crept in, soft and cautious, like a promise not yet ready to be believed. The snow melted in patches, revealing soil that had forgotten color. Branches bare for months stretched shyly toward a sun that finally lingered longer in the sky. And in a modest cottage at the edge of town, something else had begun to thaw. Ellie no longer looked over her shoulder when someone called her name in sign. She no longer flinched at the creak of floorboards or the flicker of porch lights. The bruises had faded, but it was not her skin that needed healing. It was her belief that she was not a mistake. Dusty had made it his mission. He walked with her to the forest clearing each morning, waited patiently as she traced her fingers through air, shaping stories from memory. They sat in silence, but it was never empty. When she grew tired, he would nudge her hand until it moved again, urging her to finish the sentence, to draw the sun rising even on the cloudiest pages. Lauren watched from the porch, notebook in hand, her eyes lingering on the way Ellie's shoulders now lifted when she laughed, not with sound, but with the full motion of her whole body. It was at Lauren's urging that Ellie began attending a therapy program for children with sensory trauma. The sessions took place in a nearby town once a week, inside a sunlit room filled with beanbags and chalkboards. But the first time they arrived, Ellie refused to go in. Dusty was not allowed. Ellie sat on the ground, crossed her arms, and refused to move. The therapist tried everything: bribes, jokes, even offering art supplies. Ellie didn't budge. She just stared at the closed door, as if it symbolized every wall she had ever faced. Lauren didn't push her. She simply sat down beside her, opened Ellie's sketchbook, and began to draw. A stick-figure dog. A stick-figure girl. Both outside a door. Ellie blinked. Then she drew a third figure, one with open arms. The next week, Dusty was allowed in. The other children in the group stared at first, unsure what to make of the large, silent shepherd who settled like a guardian near Ellie's feet. But soon they grew used to him. Some even asked to pet him. One boy with a stutter sat beside Dusty for nearly an hour, saying nothing, just listening to the sound of his own breath slow down. Ellie noticed. She drew it that night. The boy, the dog, the quiet. Her drawings became something more than memory. They became bridges. Lauren spoke with a caseworker named Hannah, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hoops and sleeves of case files tucked under one arm. Hannah reviewed Ellie's progress every 2 weeks, noting her physical health, emotional regulation, educational growth. But what moved her most were the drawings. They weren't just art, they were witness. One sketch in particular stayed with her. It showed a courtroom, empty except for a girl in a red jacket, and a dog standing in front of her. Above their heads, instead of speech bubbles, were clouds. Inside the clouds were pictures: an open door, a broken bottle, a bandaged paw, and finally, a window filled with light. Hannah folded the page and placed it in her folder. "I've seen hundreds of children," she said quietly to Lauren, "but I've never seen one speak so clearly without a single word." Meanwhile, in the town below, whispers of Dusty spread. The vet who examined his old leg injury said it had healed stronger than expected. The principal of Ellie's new school allowed him into the art room. The mayor's wife, whose own son had once been nonverbal, donated funds for a therapy dog license. And Ellie, she began signing not just for herself, but for others. She helped a younger girl who had just arrived from another town, too scared to speak. She showed her how to draw her name in the snow, how to tell a story with lines. They sat together at recess, Dusty between them. One day the girl asked, in clumsy sign, "Does he understand us?" Ellie smiled and wrote her answer on the pavement in chalk. "He hears what no one else can." That night, as the wind turned gentle and the stars blinked open, Ellie sat by the window with Dusty's head resting on her lap. She didn't draw. She just sat, fingers buried in his fur, eyes half closed. Outside, the trees whispered in a tongue older than sound. And inside, her heart did something it hadn't done in years. It opened. Not all wounds bleed. Some remain quiet, hidden beneath skin and silence. But sometimes all it takes is one presence that refuses to leave. One pair of eyes that speak without asking anything in return. Dusty never needed her to explain. He just stayed. And in doing so, he taught her what love without conditions really looked like. The day the adoption was finalized, the wind carried the scent of thawed earth and rain-washed pine. It was not quite warm, but the cold no longer bit. Spring had arrived in Cedar Hollow not with a parade of color, but with soft persistence, as if nature itself had decided to begin again. Ellie sat in the back seat of Lauren's car, wearing a blue dress with pockets deep enough to hide a pencil and a folded drawing. Dusty was beside her, his head out the window, tongue catching the breeze like a child testing the weather. They didn't go to a courthouse. The paperwork had been completed days ago. This was something else, a return. The car turned off the main road and wound through the trees until it reached a small clearing, the place where the old shed once stood. Lauren had rebuilt it, not to store tools or firewood, but for stories. A wooden circle now sat in the center of the space, carved benches forming a loose ring around a raised stump turned into a seat. Strings of soft yellow lights hung between the trees. Children gathered there now, laughing, drawing, signing, sharing. Not all of them had scars you could see, but they all had been left behind in one way or another. Ellie stepped out of the car, Dusty at her heel, and walked slowly to the circle. The others made space. They didn't clap. They simply watched her with the quiet reverence given to someone who had walked through fire and come out with gentleness still intact. Lauren gave her a small nod from across the circle. Ellie reached into her pocket and unfolded the drawing she had brought. It was not new. The edges were worn. The lines faint. A girl. A dog. A world behind them in ruin. A world ahead blooming. She placed the paper in the center of the circle. Then she turned to Dusty. He sat without command as he always did, his body still and calm, eyes locked on hers. She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed the top of his head. "You stayed," she signed softly. And he blinked. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Because nothing was ending. Everything was beginning. Weeks passed. The children returned each day, not because they had to, but because something in the air between those trees told them they were safe. There were no bells, no desks, no grades, just stories, just healing. Ellie became their quiet leader. She taught them how to speak through hands, how to draw what words could not say. She showed them how to notice the world again, the way petals open slowly, the way wind lifts hair in bursts, the way a dog can teach you what patience looks like. And Dusty became the soul of the place. He lay beside the fire pit during stories, walked the perimeter each morning like a guard checking his post. If a child began to shake or fall quiet, he was there, pressing his body close, anchoring them back to the present. One girl named Nora, blind in one eye and barely speaking in the other, asked Ellie once if Dusty was an angel. Ellie thought about it. Ah. Then she smiled and wrote on a piece of bark, "Better than one." And Nora laughed. On the anniversary of the night everything changed, Lauren organized a small gathering, not a celebration, a remembering. Sheriff Daniels came. So did the vet. And Marlene from the intake center. Even Hannah brought flowers. But it was Ellie who stood before them all, with Dusty by her side, and told the story. Not with voice. Not even with signs. But with pages. She passed them around, one by one, letting each person hold a chapter. The hurt. The silence. The trap. Trap. The scream that never came. The dog that did. Each hand that held the pages trembled. By the end, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Because everyone in Cedar Hollow now understood that heroes didn't always wear uniforms or arrive with sirens. Sometimes they came in the form of a limping dog with golden eyes and a heart stronger than any man. That night, Ellie placed a small stone at the edge of the clearing. On it was carved one word. Stay. And beneath it, a sketch. A girl. a dog, and stars above them. Not broken, not abandoned, just found. Because love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. And when it does, it brings spring to those the world tried to forget. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If it touched your heart, even just a little, we hope you'll take a moment to reflect, to share your thoughts in the comments below, and to let us know how it made you feel. Every voice matters, especially yours. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet strength of loyalty, we invite you to follow our journey. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story that just might stay with you forever. Until then, take care, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of those who choose to stay.